Hey, thanks for checking out Nuts and Bolts with Tone, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about a Ford Ranger, a 4.0 with lean codes. Alright, so now this took me a long time to get to where I'm at, and I've met a lot of guys along the way, along my journey as a foreman, just a random, helper, helping my fellow technicians, whatever. And I've met a lot of guys that don't understand lean codes, how to approach them, what can cause them, and how to test for them. Now, when you have a lean condition, when you have a lean code, all right, there's a multitude of things that can cause this. You can have a mass airflow sensor that's underreporting the air. You can have oxygen sensors that are failing. That can cause that as well. You can have vacuum leaks. You can have mechanical problems. You can have all kinds of things that can happen. You can have fuel. Fuel can be an issue. So a couple things that you want to check for. You want to test the mass airflow sensor. All right, I like to test the mass airflow sensor first. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do that, and that will kind of tell you if your mass airflow sensor is the problem. If you suspect the mass airflow sensor is a problem, after you've run the test that I'm going to show you, pull it out and look at it. And if you see on one side, you can see a very clean, the little bulb, the little, electrode bulbs or whatever. And on the other side, it's covered in a layer of dirt or whatever, then it's dirty. Now, I don't recommend trying to clean a mass airflow sensor because, well, there's a couple reasons. If you clean it and a customer declines, well, now their car is not fixed, but it will take longer for the code to set. And the other reason is because you can't really clean them. I know they sell mass airflow cleaner and all that stuff, but sometimes those little fine wires are so fine that you can't really clean it. Another thing about mass airflow sensors is that aftermarket mass airflow sensors do not work. In some cases, they don't work at all. In other cases, they just don't work as well. I had a Nissan Quest that was failing emissions. It was failing for NOx, which NOx is created at high combustion chamber temperatures. And the end result, I fixed a bunch of vacuum leaks and all this stuff. And the end result after I did all of that, the mass airflow sensor was the fix. They gave me like an aftermarket one and it didn't work. I put a factory one on, boom, fixed, gone. So I've seen that happen many, many times where a factory one fixes it right away and an aftermarket one either just doesn't work right out of the box with that vehicle, or it takes time and it just keeps failing. All right, mass airflow sensors, that's the gist of that. Another thing is vacuum leaks. A vacuum leak can cause this, and you can test for that. I'm going to show you how to test for a vacuum leak. There's two ways to test it. One, I show you in this video, and I'll explain later another way to test that. Another thing is fuel. Fuel pressure, fuel volume can be an issue. If you have pressure but you don't have enough volume being delivered, then you'll have a lack of fuel, basically. I'm going to show you how to test for that as well. One quick test kind of gets you in the right direction. The other key to this whole thing is freeze frame. You have to know when the code's set. If it sets at idle, if it sets at wide open throttle, if it sets at cruise. Very, very important. If it sets at idle, well, then you could be looking at a mass airflow sensor. You could be looking at a fuel volume, most likely not a fuel volume issue, but a vacuum leak. Now, if it happens off idle, driving down the road, it's most likely not a vacuum leak, because a vacuum leak isn't present when you've opened up the throttle. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to test for that. We're gonna actually dive into this. We're gonna get right into it. I'm going to show you how to test this, and I'm going to show you what the problem is on this specific vehicle, and I'm going to show you how we get there. Let's check it out. All right, so here we go. This is that 2001 Ford Ranger with 190,000 miles. All right, so the first thing you're going to do is go into codes. Going to go into memory codes. All right, so right there, so the anti-theft code, okay, we'll deal with that if we need to, but the vehicle starts, so most likely that's not an issue. All right, what it's here for is the P0171 and 174. So now what we're gonna do is the most important thing when you deal with any code really, but especially fuel trim codes, especially on a Ford. So we're gonna go to generic functions, because the things that really matter, so we're gonna go to freeze frame right there. All right, the thing that really matters is temperature, speed, throttle position, well, not throttle position, but commanded, calculated load. All right, so right here, we're looking at engine RPM, 9. All right, so first of all, you gotta make sure that it's the freeze frame for the code you're looking for. So there we go, 171. All right. So sometimes with a Ford, what you'll find is it will come in with a 171 and that's it. And so a lot of guys make the mistake of chasing the 171 and they're only looking at bank 1. However, if you look at the freeze frame, a lot of times what I've found is that a lot of vehicles will have a 174 almost set. So it'll be like 28 on the long term for bank 1 and 26 for bank 2, meaning it almost set. So really you have both banks are the problem. So now in this one here, the keys that we're gonna look at is the engine speed. All right, so 931 RPMs. So that's most likely at idle. Seems a little bit high, but 190 degrees on the coolant temp. And then the fuel trim, really what we're looking at is the long-term bank 1, 15.6%, and then we're going to scroll down and now we're going to see bank 2 is at 8.6%. all right, so they're both lean, however bank 1 is worse. All right, vehicle speed 0 miles per hour and the calculated load is 65%, but that doesn't really matter because it's at idle. It's at idle, you're not moving. Okay, so now we know what we're going to chase for this problem. So now once we've determined this, we're gonna document all of these readings. All right, so here after you've documented your code and your freeze frame data, now what we're going to do is we selected only the mass airflow sensor, the upstream O2 and the on both banks, and the RPMs. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a volumetric efficiency test, and that is testing the mass airflow sensor. And we're going to go drive it at wide open throttle, and as soon as it shifts to second gear, we're going to pause it. But what we're going to do here is, this is a really important step, is you want to go into graph mode, because what that's going to do is that's going to give you a min-max of your mass airflow, your RPMs, and your O2 readings. So we're going to do that, and we'll go over the values. So what you want to do is you want to go out onto an open road where you can floor it, foot to the floor. And then as soon as it shifts, you're going to hit the pause button. And then I'll show you what we're going to look at. I'm going to run that right now, and then I'll show you. So before we run that volumetric efficiency test, another step that you want to take is you want to go into cylinder contribution test. And then you don't want this on graph mode. And what you're going to do is you're going to look at all the cylinders. And so the most important thing here is that cylinder 4, it has a slight miss to it. It keeps detecting that it's low. That's cylinder 4. Because if you have a misfire, you can't chase a mass airflow sensor problem. So there you can see that it just keeps on hitting. So number 4 clearly has a problem. So we're going to run this volumetric efficiency test and see what it looks like, but we also got to look at that number 4 cylinder. Right before you go to drive it, you want to hit this X right here so it starts the data over, so that way your min-max is correct. It's from only when you do the test. So right before you take off, hit the X and clear all the data. All right, so we just got done running this test. Now for a volumetric efficiency test, all you need is the mass airflow reading, the RPM reading, and the number of cylinders, how hot it is outside, and what size engine. And you calculate that all into a calculation, and I'll show you a screenshot of that reading. But the reason that we scope these O2 PIDs is this. When you go wide open throttle and O2 sensors, the O2 sensors should go full rich to dump fuel. And so in this case right here, you can see 800, and the reason we go into graph mode is the mass airflow reading at the shift point was 177.57. The RPMs were at 53.53, and the reading for the O2 is 903 millivolts and 878 millivolts. Now that tells me that the O2s went full rich, the computer commanded full rich, and they actually went full rich, indicating that we most likely do not have a fuel volume issue, because fuel volume can cause a problem. You can have fuel pressure and not volume. So if it was fuel related, most likely these PIDs would not be at 900 millivolts because they're measuring fuel. Okay, so I just showed you a screenshot of the volumetric efficiency calculator. So in this case, it was 81%. Now that seems low. It should be a little higher. However, I've seen a lot of vehicles where the volumetric efficiency isn't 100%. It's not 92%. This test checks the engine breathing. So the things that can fail this test, that can make this test fail, is a mass airflow sensor underreporting the air, or a lack of air getting into the engine, or a lack of exhaust leaving the engine. So if the engine cannot breathe, if the cats are partially plugged, if they're plugged, anything that of those ranges can cause a failed volumetric efficiency test. In this case, after I got the 81%, remember we're testing for the mass airflow sensor. The exhaust was not plugged in this case. In some cases it can be, and you have to know that because that can be a failing factor in what you're dealing with. In this case, the exhaust was fine. So basically with the 81%, what I did was I pulled the mass airflow sensor out and looked at it. What's really common on a mass airflow sensor is one side of the sensor will be really clean, the engine side, and the side coming in will be really, really dirty, and you'll see a layer of dirt on it. This one, I think it had a nice bright brown bulb in there. You can see it. In some cases, they're really small, they're really big, all different kinds of mass airflow sensor filaments. And there's multiple different filaments sometimes. And on this one, it was clean on both sides. Okay, maybe one side was a little bit dirty, but I couldn't see it. But usually you'll see it will look like a layer of dirt. And in this case, that was not the case. And we moved on. Now let's test it for a vacuum leak. All right, so here's what we have here. We have the easy intake adapter. And what this is for smoke testing. You have the little valve and you open it to release it and you close it to seal it up. You have the other end, that's where you put your smoke. In this case, I'm going to pump up the bulb, and it's going to show you that this part right here is getting bigger and bigger, and it will swell up to, I'm not sure what the diameter is, but you can see the size of that intake tube. Now you can see right there at the beginning of the tube, there's a place where the PCV hose comes in. Normally you would plug that. So I just went in further down the intake hole to go past that. Basically, it's going to seal this intake air tube. And then with the other hose, I'm going to be able to apply smoke. And that's going to put smoke into the intake system, sealing this. I love this tool because I don't have to deal with putting a rubber glove over the throttle body and it popping off. Here we have the Smoke Pro smoke machine, designed for smoke testing, intake systems, evap systems. It has the perfect amount of pressure. You hooked the positive and the negative up to the battery. Sometimes this can be tricky when you're doing evap because you have to go all the way to the back of the car. So sometimes you have to use an alternative battery. Then you're going to plug an air hose into the back of it. And then the other hose is where the smoke comes out. Every time you turn this on, you want to hit the button and make the smoke come out to make sure that it's working and it's applying smoke, because this thing runs off of baby oil. And if the baby oil gets low, you won't have smoke. So now we know that we have smoke. You can see it, not with my glove in the way. You can see it there. So we're just going to apply this right to the hose. Now this is pushing it past the ball. I'll put a link to this easy intake adapter in the video in the description below. You can see the smoke poured out right away from the other side of the throttle body. Now this has a plastic throttle body on this vehicle. And the first place it poured out is the TPS hole. You can see it right there just puking out of the TPS hole. I've actually never seen it do that before. I've seen a tiny little trickle, but usually throttle bodies should not leak that bad. This one's leaking really bad. So I'm going to pull the TPS off and do an inspection to see where the seal is and to see why it's leaking and where it's leaking. Now you can see there's smoke on the other side of the intake tube as well. We haven't got there yet. I'm still looking at where the first place that it came out of. I'm baffled. Now we're on the other side. So it's pouring out of the throttle linkage shaft as well, which connects through to the TPS. But there's also another leak. There we go, the PCV hose. I just moved it back and forth. You saw the hose moving and the smoke get larger. Right there is the PCV fitting. That is where it's leaking, and that hose is not on all the way, and it's swollen. You can see that hose clamp is keeping it from going on, but it's also swollen, so it's not even sealing on that PCV. That's a heated PCV, so above it and below it are coolant lines. In this case, it needs a new PCV hose assembly, which goes around to the PCV valve. Really needs a throttle body as well. Okay, so one more way to test for a vacuum leak is to go into your scan tool, and some people like to use the oxygen sensors. I like to use short-term fuel trim. So what I'll do is I'll go into the scan tool and I will select short-term fuel trim for bank 1 and bank 2, as long as there's 2 banks. In this case, there is 2 banks. Remember, 2 banks means that there's an oxygen sensor on each bank. If there's one upstream oxygen sensor, if the exhaust comes together and there's an oxygen and the upstream is there, that's one bank system. That means the whole engine is one bank. In this case, it has an oxygen sensor for both banks, meaning that there is a bank 1 and bank 2. That's how you determine the difference. But the way that you can tell that is you go into short-term fuel trim. You want to hit the check mark and you want to deselect everything. And you want to only select short-term fuel trim bank 1 and bank 2. The reason that you only select those 2 PIDs is in a scan tool works like this. It's a computer. The more things that are open and running, the slower it goes. The less you have, so that's why if you have a computer bogging down and you close everything, clear all the cache, clear all the memory, it goes faster. It's because everything went to sleep. Your phone's the same way. So if you go into a scan tool and you deselect everything you don't want, and you only select the items you do, it reports faster, so your data is more accurate. So in this case, what you would do is you would select short-term fuel trim bank 1 and bank 2. You can do this with carb clean, but remember, carb clean can catch on fire. I don't like to use carb clean unless I absolutely have to, because I've had the fire and I don't like to have to deal with it. So I use propane. I have a propane enrichment, has a knob, you turn it on and you push a button and you go around with a hose spraying propane. When you do that, you're spraying it along the intake gaskets. You're spraying it along anything that has intake manifold vacuum. And you're looking for the fuel trims to rise. Okay, remember the rise is a plus, it's adding fuel. Okay, so it's seeing fuel. I'm sorry, it's not adding fuel. Short-term fuel trim is what's happening right now. So if it's at 0 and you spray fuel, it's going to shoot up to 18%, 12, 15%, whatever it is. So you're looking for that to rise. And sometimes it takes a second. You could come across here and the vacuum leak could be here. And by the time you got here, it sucked it in and it took a second to register. So remember that. Go slow, be patient. Remember, this could be the problem. It could be at number 1. By the time you get over to number 5, number 1 finally sucked it in. Now it's reporting. That's how you check it. with propane. You can do that. I didn't show you in this video, but that is another way to test for it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned something about fuel trims and how to test for it. This goes for every vehicle. In this vehicle, I specifically talked about a mass airflow sensor. It's really common in a Ford. Along the way, you're going to figure out what's common in different vehicles. In a Ford, mass airflow sensors are really common. Fuel filters can also be a problem, which is why we talked about fuel volume. So every manufacturer is different. This one was a Ford, so we went after it the way I would attack a Ford. If I get a different manufacturer in, I'll show you how to tackle that as well. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the bell. You get notified of all my future content, which I'm pretty sure you're going to want to see. Also, check me out on Instagram at Nuts and Bolts with Tone. Daily life as a mechanic, show you tools, show you the stuff you want, and show you how to use it. Thanks for checking me out. I'll see you next time.